I mean, what some of the rest of you guys think about? How does this affect the independent? John?
Yeah, I would, well, first of all, I want to walk through this carefully because within 30 feet of me is probably 6 of the largest suppliers in the industry. So,
just remember, John's leading this conversation now.
But the issue of consolidation, no question, creates scale, and scale creates leverage. So I think it's a significant challenge. I wouldn't say it's a threat by any means, but I do think it's a significant challenge. And this isn't just independents, this is to the channel itself. As the large get larger, the opportunities to have different alternatives shrink. I think that concept of leverage can be significant in the channel. So, I mean, I see it happening, and I understand the agenda of trying to build out a portfolio and expand, you know, complementary type things. But just in the perspective of consolidation and that risk, I would identify that as a risk to the channel in terms of, especially when the very large continue to get very larger. So I do think it's a challenge to the channel, not just the independents.
Dan, what's your take?
Well, I think that when you look at something like that with the consolidation, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. However, within that challenge, you have to look at where the opportunity is for your company. So where my opportunity might be when two manufacturers come together, that might actually enhance our position. So maybe now the other manufacturer's in the buying group, or maybe my relationship was really good with the other guy, but I didn't have a relationship with the other guy. So now the two of them together, and now there's a relationship and an inroad. So when you look at that challenge as an independent, we try and find the opportunities within that. So when something happens, that's what you find that where's the good that we can pull out of this that happens to us? How do we affect change for us that's a positive thing? So it's a challenge, but you got to look at it from a different perspective sometimes.
Is it going to get worse or better in the next 5 years?
I think, like to Bob's point, there are 1,000,001 LED distributors manufacturers out there now. I think you're going to continue to see it. It's going to be a challenge, but within that consolidation, there will be new opportunities that come out.
George, what's your take?
Well, I think that's an interesting premise. Is it going to get better or worse? I think that's up for all of us to figure out. There will be more consolidation. So is that better or worse? Right? It depends on how you look at it. But as long as we're working together, and I would say that there's been a big challenge with this consolidation for our company with people who are buying folks that we didn't represent, and then but the conversations have been respectful, right? There is a desire for companies to want to do things with us now with their new companies that we were doing with someone else, but I've not felt, and I think this is the appropriate approach. I've not felt a tremendous amount of pressure to do that. It was more, let's have a conversation and see, is there a good fit here? And I think as long as we continue to approach things in that way, I am hopeful that this consolidation will continue to benefit each company, make us stronger, and we'll find ways to work together to keep serving our customer.
Yeah, that's the important part. So, Bill, what's your take?
Well,
this is a big subject.
It's great when you see your good business partners continue to grow, and we certainly have many here in this room, and we're excited when they make acquisitions. Certainly, there are elements of it that you get sort of sad about because there are certain brands that we all kind of knew and grew up with that have sold that have really never been the market leaders that they once were, or and there's a certain amount of leadership that's lost within the process. There's good and there's bad when this kind of things occurs. Large manufacturers are always going to need strong distributors. I think whether you're an independent or whether you're a chain, your value to your manufacturers is going to be based on the job that you're doing in the marketplace. So I don't view it particularly as a threat at all. I do think that the biggest challenge as it relates to distributors and manufacturers right now is the amazing amount of turnover in the manufacturing leadership within your executive teams. I mean, there's just not the continuity. I mean, we want to be able to have relationships with the senior management at your company, and your company has always been well served by really knowing the industry and knowing the players. And there's just so much turnover today in the manufacturing community and leaders that creates a challenge. And perhaps those two things are a little bit related in the corporate pressures and the financial issues associated with being big. But we'd hope that those of you that are in new leadership roles will take the time to get to know some of the best independents and some of the best chains in this industry, because we have a lot we can teach each other.
I found when you started to talk about the turnover, all the heads started nodding in formation down there. And it made me think about Ed when he was talking about being the commissioner of police here. And the one lesson he said to everybody is that when you're in a crisis, it's too late to go build a relationship. You need to do it before. Right. And I hadn't really thought about it until you just said it, Bill, but that is a major difference. I mean, and I always just figured it was my age that a lot of the guys that I kind of came up with, they've retired and the rest of it. But because of all the acquisitions and mergers, I don't know where anybody is anymore. So
that's not healthy for our industry, and it doesn't work. It's not good for the manufacturer. And of course, it's hard when you're in a new job to get out there. How are you going to get out? I mean, coming to meetings like this, going to the IMARK meeting, the AD meeting. These are valuable things to do, even though they're time, then they eat your time, and everyone's time's precious. But it's worth it when we all take the time to get to know each other and to have open conversations about what's working and what's not working. There are a lot of smart people in this industry.
Hey, Michael,
Go ahead, Bob.
I think Bill, right on the money, and I'll put a plug in, if you will, for NAED here. Part of the Education Foundation, AD has a representative on there for a couple of years, and then they rotate off, and IMARK goes on. So that's how it works. But at the last one the other day, one of the programs that NAED has is where they will allow manufacturers to work at a distributor and learn what a distributor is all about. And interestingly enough, and this is
mean like an internship where
for a few days
actually
to learn,
physically there?
Yeah, physically there. And there's also, they've made it better. They tried this a few years ago, but they made it better because there's actually a preliminary course that you kind of take before you do this. And what Rory was happy to hear is that so many manufacturers actually want to sign people up. But I'll challenge our distributor partners. There hasn't been as many distributors who have said, okay, we'll set this time aside.
In other words, there's more demand from manufacturers to learn than there's distributors willing to.
So I would just encourage everybody to do that. And then one idea came out, and it's really what Bill said about getting to know each other better. Sometimes our finance people, sometimes at a large distributor, but clearly at the manufacturer, they're in their own bubble. And they're not going to let this policy go through. They're not going to let this return go through. And then you're in the field, particularly, even if doesn't matter if you're chain or independent, some decisions that sound so logical, hey, we got to take care of this situation, are financially driven that they don't get taken care of. So if I was going to say anything to the manufacturers, get your bloody finance people to take this and have them to learn how a distributor operates and all the issues that they're facing and all the commercial people are facing day in and day out. And maybe it's not bad that the distributors maybe reverse and go and find out the trick, because being a manufacturer at one time, it's a challenge too.
Well, now that we're sort of leading with our chin in a bar fight.
We should do this at a bar next year.
I'm in, brother.
That would be better.
I'm in, I'll play. I'm not an alcoholic, but I'm a gifted amateur. Without getting us in trouble, and we've got to respect all the NAD rules so none of us ever do any hard time, but I want to talk about pricing for a second. And I don't want to do any price signaling or talk about individual customers or products or any of that stuff. You guys all know that speech. But one of the things that really has kind of hit me, for a quarter century in this industry, is pricing practices. And that really seems to be, I would say, almost consistent inconsistency. And there's like, the bigger you get, the more takeaway power, and it's kind of like the eggs in the basket. How much of this pricing variation is just noise and salespeople complaining, and how much is really just irrational or just, I mean, I don't understand it, and it's just, I've learned to get used to it. I mean, they say married to a mean woman for 11 years, you can get used to anything. But what's the story with the big picture industry, no specifics? Anybody want to take the lead on that?
Yeah, I'm not touching it.
I'll save you for the end, Batman.
No, I'm done, baby.
It's got to be George or John on this one.
I'll take a crack at this. There's a lot of noise, right? We talk often to our sales folks that, you know, the easiest thing for a customer to say is you're high, right? Because they may not like you, right? But it's hard to say when someone's sitting in front of you. I don't like you, this is why I'm not giving you order, right? They may just really like doing business with somebody else. It may not be your turn. They may not care for a whole lot of things. So you're high. And so that's all they hear. That's part of their life is you're high. And so when they bring that back to management, it's our job to figure out, and it's an important role for distribution to play, to help the manufacturers figure out what the market price is. You need to take that seriously. And the more we started thinking about this, the more we felt like there would be some answers in our data, in our distribution system. And we've come across a pretty interesting set of facts that we're just at this meeting going to start sharing on an SKU level based on hit rates, right, with the manufacturers. Because I think that there's always going to be pricing problem, but the issue, you want to address the specific items.
You're talking about market price. What's the market price?
Try to find a price that makes sense, right? There's areas where we all should make money, and we should be fully helping the manufacturers to leverage those products that they invested in so much that are either unique or that they bother to make when they're slow moving, right? They ought to get value for that. And then there's things that market changes where the price is always in flux. And if you have a method where you can share real data with the manufacturers and show, here, listen, we went out and did some research on these 10 SKUs because our hit rate on them has dropped off dramatically. And this is where we feel the market is. I think that kind of approach would be better accepted. And I think it should, at some point, that's an industry standard we should all expect from each other.
That'd be very different than just the storytelling, right?
Correct.
Because
I'm not interested in the story.
Right, but all the field salespeople are black belts at storytelling. It's never me, it's always the purchasing department. John, what's your take on this?
It's a really great question. The concept of pricing, and would be my opinion that it is continuing to flatten. So I think there was historically element of noise and clutter and people complaining. I think there was some basis to it, for sure.
Okay.
And I think it's becoming more significant because I think that as markets, as you know, if you take any point in history, 30 years ago, just pick a number. Let's say in the United States there was, 1,000 different markets for pricing, and then 10 years later there's 500, and then 10 years later there's 100. There is just a flattening. There's no question that's taking place. So I think it is a challenge for both of us, both the manufacturer and the channel, to try and manage that process, because in reality, we want to make money on a higher price. That our margin dollars are stronger if we make money on $1, if we make money on 75 cents. So we have to manage that better. I do think that we as a channel, not necessarily just independents, but I think smart independents clearly are recognizing that price management now is a much more critical part of their path forward. Just like a much more granular marketing strategy is a very critical part of a smart distributor's path forward. So, but I think pricing, in fact, it's interesting, one of the gold sponsors at the event's a pricing service company.
Right,
here
Spoor,
at this meeting. So, so I think it's an age-old challenge. I do think, as we are prone to do, as it becomes more problematic, we try and address it and confront it head on. But there's no denying that there's this leveling taking place, and so the disparities that exist and have existed and really ideally should exist are much more impactful now than what they've been. And I think that's where the noise and the clutter is continuing
Right.
to ratchet up.
The idea of it consolidating and getting the transparency, that actually is driving a lot of it, I think. So Dan, what's your take? How much is noise and how much is real?
I think it's a lot of noise. You know, the Indian always blames the arrow, but it's really never the arrow. To Bill's point, you know, sometimes you just got to walk away from an order and know where your profitability is. That's what we're into. And not only that, but a lot of what's going on the internet right now, you can go look up a price on anything, and your customers are doing that. So to have a sound pricing policy within your company where it's fair and competitive, so that your employees don't feel that it's out of whack, so they have faith in it, it's another one of those challenges you got to continue to work at.
You know, I would offer just because I know a number of people in this room on the manufacturing side. There's no question they recognize the challenges as well. And in dialogue with them, they are very sensitive to trying to manage this concept of a price, just to the point that Dan made, where someone could go online and now find that. That isn't necessarily in their best interest unless that is properly managed. I think they learned a little bit of that lesson from the home center strategy that developed back in the 90s and the 2000s. So I would offer that I get the sense that, you know, we as a channel are very focused on trying to help manage that process forward. I do think the manufacturing community echoes those same, sees that same need, and they're making efforts to try and manage that.
I think people are getting much more interested and more willing. I mean, one of the things that happens anytime a private equity firm buys a distributor, the very first thing they do is put in strategic pricing. I mean, like everybody all the time. I'd be interested, Bob and Bill, from your perspective. These guys see it from a distributor side. If you look at it more, because you guys are more at the market level, I mean, how much of it's really noise and how much is real?
Gosh, I don't have much to add to this conversation on price.
Do you agree with what they're saying?
I support my fellow panelists 100%.
Okay.
110.
I hear the sound of rushing water as you wash your hands.
Well, the only comment, and I've made this comment publicly in front of the suppliers. I said, you know, the one thing with distributors is they want a lower price and a higher rebate, and the manufacturers want a higher price and a lower rebate. So once you figure out how to get in the middle, which John was talking about, I think you can move forward. But I'll just leave this one story I just heard just 2 weeks ago, and it was this guy who's an executive at an electrical distributor. And he said, you know, the greatest lesson I was ever taught, he said, I used to be in the plumbing industry, and I was selling this old crusty guy who owned this plumbing business. He really couldn't get his business, and I kept going back and telling my people I was losing it on price, as George was pointing out. He said, this old timer pulled me aside and he said, son, you don't lose orders on price. He said, you got to work on your interactive skills, you got to work on your relationships, and your company's got to have real good service levels, and you won't lose one on price again.
Yeah, it is the world's most wonderful excuse. There's one of the standard lines that every customer wants to buy from the best supplier at the worst supplier's price.